Hey guys, Brent Hull Build Show, 20 different ways to use moldings. They're gonna take, 5 moldings and do 25 things with them, all variety of being creative and looking at moldings and how to think about them. Come join me. Okay, so, my friends at Kukin Lumber designed that line of moldings for them, and some of the profiles may be a little esoteric, a little bit out there in the historical realm, but they're moldings that you should be using and you should be able to understand. I'm going to show you moldings and kind of different ways of playing around with moldings, different ways of thinking about moldings, because really, what I want for you guys is I want for you as master builders, as master craftsmen, to remember the past, right? And don't just regurgitate what you did in the last job. You're constantly kind of broadening your practice and broadening the kind of things that you can bring to it, so you can bring creativity and beauty to your jobs. And so I'm going to just show you some moldings, and as I get into this, you're going to kind of understand what I'm doing, because all it is to me are shapes. I don't know if you remember that ICAA board that I've got that has the moldings. It has the fillet, it has a astragal, it has a concave, convex, and compound moldings. Very simple chart. That's how you build moldings, is with those shapes. And sometimes our moldings and our crowns and different things can be just these bumps and bruises and just cuts and nicks and all kinds of messy things that don't make any sense to the eye. So clear moldings and clear ideas help. Now, what I did here is I built us a little panel, because a lot of these moldings should be used as panel molds and can be broken around. The first one is this molding here. You see it's a panel mold. Let me give you the history of the panel mold. In the Victorian era, okay, you begin to see this panel mold show up everywhere. Now, it ends up being a base cap. It ends up being a panel mold. It goes on doors. It begins to get used again in like the 70s to panel out doors, and in the 80s. There's the history. Early Victorian, and then kind of, the McMansion area, you begin to see it again. Now, why is that? Well, because it sits proud, okay, because it sits above the stile and rail frame here, and this is just a 3/4 inch frame I'm using, it projects more and it looks showier, okay? Now, we're going to talk about these moldings in a sec. This is the little panel mold, a little federal panel mold that's going to fit inside here, but if I fit it inside here, you're not even going to be able to see it, okay? And so it goes in right here, right? And we'll cut that and put it around there and show you how that changes things. But this sits below the stile and rail, okay? And so it's less showy. Now, if you're building doors, both of these work. If you're building panels, both of these work. It's that narrative I'm talking about when I talk about the narrative of a house and kind of how you're communicating. These moldings really do communicate and really do change things. So the first thing I would do is I would have it as a panel mold in a situation like this. A lot of you carpenters are building panels like this on a job site. I like to have a 3/4 inch stile and rail. Okay, sometimes I'll go down to a 1/2 inch, but no less than that. The 3/4 is kind of universal so that you can use it for a lot of different things. But that's kind of the first thing I do. You could also do this as a cap, and this was done in the Victorian period, on top of the wainscoting, right? This could be the top of your wainscot cap. So it can function for a number of different things. And then if it's on your base, it can be down here in your base, right? So your base sits just below your paneling and it sits down here on top of that. Now, I don't think I would do it in all three, but here we are: base cap, wainscot cap, panel mold, door panel mold. There's 4 uses for it right there that I think can help. Now, notice that there's a scale to this thing, okay? That because this thing is 1.5 inches wide, it's going to have a certain scale. So if my panels got really small, right? If I was doing a mantle, I know some guys like to panel your mantles where the panel is going to be much smaller. This is going to be too big. This is going to be too heavy. It's going to be clunky, okay? And whereas a molding like this smaller panel mold, it kind of sits behind there more in scale. Now, I've got a Greek Revival panel mold and I've got a Federal panel mold. Now, the difference between these two is very subtle. So if we think about Georgian Federal and Greek Revival moldings, if I drew this shape, right, when it projects out like that and it's really big, right, if that was my panel mold, this would be a Georgian one, right? Georgian, they didn't really do panel molds like they did later, but by same scale, if I did this, which is KB 73, right? So that's 73. This is federal. The reason why is because these beads were added into those moldings, and when you visualize it, when you see it, those beads break it up, they lighten it, they make it kind of easier to understand. And then if you look at this Greek Revival one, it actually does this, okay? Where you've got this kind of oval egg shape right there. And so these are subtle little differences, but if I put this on a mantle or I put this under a stair tread or something like that, that's really going to help communicate where that works and kind of how that goes. I'm going to go cut these, kind of show you the different personalities in here, and show you another trick we can do on the federal stuff, which is really interesting. So now you see how different this looks. And this is a federal panel, right? So if I'm building out a federal wainscot or even a federal door, this is an easy way to make a federal door or a federal panel with this panel mold, right? You're adding this personality, this story. Now look, we'll oftentimes order true style doors without any kind of sticking or anything else in them, flat panel, and then apply our own panel mold. So we'll take a Greek Revival, or we'll take a federal panel mold, or even a French panel mold, and insert it into those doors so that we get the right story and the right narrative. These are all little subtle things that are going to help and make a big difference. Another molding you saw me cutting over there was this little panel mold that gets applied on the inside, okay? So this would be a panel mold that gets applied inside just like this in the federal period. Now this is a very small molding, right? But now it adds this personality to this paneling, and even sometimes these are curved or sometimes they get cross-setted in the corners, right? And so there's a lot of fun ways to do this and play with this. So at Winter Tour, you'll see this all over the place. In Federal Parlor, in Lancaster, right? You see this kind of organization and this kind of handling of a panel mold. And you'll see how these panels change and that personality they can add to this thing just with applied moldings. Now, let's say you didn't have this one. Now this is a very small molding. I want you to be able to look at the moldings you've got and be able to come up with other examples of that. For instance, you could take this same molding and just cut off that front edge, because that front edge is very similar to this molding here. So I could just rip off that little piece right there, right? So I'm just basically taking this piece right there and I am cutting that, right? So I've got moldings that I'm playing around with that we could use for other purposes. So I always want you looking at other moldings to go, oh yeah, well there it is, it's right there. I'll just rip that off. I don't need that other molding. So if you don't see it or don't find it, realize that it may be on some of your other moldings. So there's a federal one. Here's a Greek Revival one. You're not going to see a huge difference on this, but it is subtle and it is, I think, important, and it is part of that narrative. And so now I take this out, and part of that Greek Revival narrative is kind of this stone-like simple thing. So if you didn't want to do a molding like this, you could just do a step in here because it's kind of has this modern feel to it. But my wainscot panel can change a number of different ways just applying different panel molds. And realize, guys, that this can go onto any kind of wainscot panel mold, any kind of door, any kind of panelization that you're doing. Personally, I'd like to see less of that because I see it in places where I don't think it belongs, but this is a great way to use those tools and use those moldings. Now, another one that we didn't talk about, I don't have mocked up, but let's say you got a stair tread, okay, right here, right? And it goes back, and then your riser's down here. Instead of sticking a cove under here, which is kind of a common mold, you take one of these federal panel molds, right, and put this in it and run this across, and all of a sudden you have these lines in there that give it distinction and a look here that would be great under a stair tread. So now you are taking this same panel mold, that federal panel mold, and putting it under your stair as a replacement for the cove, because in the federal period they didn't use a cove, right? Or they didn't use it like we would use it. It wasn't that kind of standard molding, but this kind of molding was seen all over the place. I still remember a house in Charleston that I visited, and the first time I saw that they used a different molding under a stair tread, and that's the way to give personality and give kind of oomph to your work. Realize too, guys, I'm sorry to be rambling about this, but this gets into the subtlety of moldings and why they matter. But when you're building mantles, when you're building more furniture-like things, because the mantle in the historic period was more like a piece of furniture. So a panel mold like this makes a lot of sense. And I know you may be hesitant to use it, but this is the kind of thing that could act as a bed mold underneath a shelf as it goes out. Because if you're using crowns that are in a bedroom or in a main part of the house, they get way too big. And I want those to be shrunk down quite a bit. So when you're getting into building cabinetry, when you're building in mantles, when you're building things that are more furniture quality, you want smaller moldings because historic furniture had smaller moldings. This could be even a capital, right? If you had little pilaster that run up on the corner of the mantle, this could be a little pilaster cap that goes across the top of that. So many fun things that I want you to get creative and figure out, but these moldings are highly useful. They can be distinguishing for you. They can be the kind of thing that goes, man, your stuff's so creative and so interesting, and here's a good example. Another molding they asked me to kind of help them figure out is this reeded casing, okay? Now the reeded casing was really popular in the 1940s. In the 1940s, it was used as a door casing. So Dumb want to put a molding in, reeded casing, 1940s, colonial revival especially, okay? One of the reasons this shows up in that colonial revival era of the 1940s is because it was very popular, again, in the Georgian Federal, Greek revival eras, where it was used in a number of different ways. And these reeds were different sizes. I like this reed. It has a lot of different uses and a lot of different opportunities. One, I could cut this into lengths right here, pop, pop, chop, 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 and fill up this panel with reeding. Now, we see that at Pennypacker Winter Tour. The reeding was much smaller than this, but it was a fun way that in the panels of the jam and in the panels of the thing, they used reeding. And so reeding could be something that could be very interesting and fun and very different, okay? The other thing to do, this could be a really interesting wainscot, because if you just wanted to use a wainscot cap like the 88 that we were doing here, you could just have this on top there, and that actually ends up being really interesting. In the Victorian period, what you'd see sometimes in these courthouses is they would alternate. And so you would see a reeded thing like this, and then a flat, and then a reeded thing, and then a flat, right? So that the reeding goes like this, your cap would go across it, and it ends up being a really interesting kind of look with this alternating pattern. It has variety, it has interest, but it actually really looks good. So look at the other thing you could do. This could be a reeded soffit, okay? So here's our classical crown and cornice that goes along, cimation, corona, and bed mold, right? Instead of doing a flat soffit, you can do a reeded soffit. And so this is especially good in the Federal period, but that's a really pretty way of kind of dressing out a crown. And if you see it up high, right, it adds a lot of interest and a lot of beauty. So there's 3 ways to do it. Notice too that I've got it here and I've cut it down a little bit, but there's a chair rail, right? There's an interesting chair rail that could go all along with this kind of the Federal kind of cool things. In the Federal period, they oftentimes did this kind of reading or did this kind of detail. And where did I get this? Again, I want you guys looking for different moldings, and I can actually get 2 different moldings out of this door casing. I ripped it off to create this. I ripped it off and ripped it down to create this molding, because that's just the back of this. So I'm using this cap, right? I'm using the cap here as a starting piece, as this tinea, as a defining piece that then the other parts go away. So you could do that as a door casing as well, right? This could be your door casing with a back band, essentially, is what you're showing there. So I'm looking at this molding and I'm going, okay, I can actually take this part and make some interesting things with it. I can also take this and make a cork bead right there. Now the cork bead is kind of one of those things that I think is kind of underused. We use it a lot, and all I did was rip this one off, right? That's just right there. I ripped off that thing, and now if I had the corner of a door casing or of a panel jamb, I could run my panel jamb up to this, have a cork bead on the corner, and then this goes to a door casing, right? This goes to something else. This is a real handy way of turning corners and doing things. We use a cork bead a lot. It could go on a beam, right? If you did a box beam, this could be the corners of your box beam so that it have a little bit more interest and a little bit more fun. There's a lot of cool things. It could be on a stair newel, right? You could actually box stair newel and use these on the corners. So the quirk bead is something that is actually kind of interesting and fun because the shadow lines of it soften it and kind of make it things less clunky. But you know what I'm doing? I'm MacGyvering all this up, right? To take this reeded casing, and it's not just a door casing, but that it can be a wainscot, it can be fill my panels out, I can do the reeded soffit. There are fun, unique things. So where do these ideas come from? The past, right? Looking at the past, understanding the historic precedent, and going, oh yeah, I could use that there, I could use that there. So if you wanted to use the reeded casing and then take one of these moldings as the cap, right? You could probably, right, make a little column out of this, right? This could be the neck of your column. You could do a little flat piece here and do a little capital. You could take some of these moldings, maybe this is your capital, right? You see what I'm doing? I'm just getting creative with a lot of these shapes, and I could use this as my astragal, right? To create my neck, do another flat piece and do a cap. I can make a column out of this. And so reading has a ton of great historic precedent and a ton of great opportunities. So because of these harsh edges, right? It's looking Greek Revival, it's looking modern, right? This could be the kind of molding that you could use in a modern house if you're doing something contemporary. I know modern was a big deal one time, right? There can be a little cap that goes over a door. So the door header or a window header, that could be kind of a modern version of a window or door header that was really popular in the 1900s. And so that's kind of an arts and crafts, a tip to that. You know, this could also be some kind of wainscot cap, right? It could also sit like this and function as some kind of cap. This also I see up top maybe as a crown, because there's some crowns that actually run onto the ceiling. This is the kind of crown that if your molding came along and did this, right, this could project it farther onto the ceiling. So there's a number of shapes and ideas that this can do, but I think all of those are good. I think all of those work. The harder one that Ryan and I laugh about, the guy Kukin, is this one. Now, it's an astragal molding, okay? So astragal moldings were really popular during the Victorian era. Now, this, in my mind, would be a good molding for an interior board and batten, right? Because this was used historically as a decorative batten between boards. So in a paneled room, I know that the shiplap was such a popular look. This could, if you went vertical, you know, every other one having this kind of astragal cap on it could be a very decorative way to give it texture and to give the room and the look and feel of something kind of fun there. This can be also something that could go on the ceiling. So you could have a Gothic panelization, and this could panelize that ceiling. You could also put it on the ceiling as, you know, in this Gothic Revival feel where you've got these boards coming together and then these are what separate it. So this molding is kind of Gothic Revival. It is Victorian. And so you're going to be trying to play around with it and use it in those kind of situations. I could see it being where two cabinets come together, the mold strip between the cabinets, if you're trying to find a little bit more decoration or oomph between where those come together. But there's 3 or 4 places to use this astragal. I think it's an interesting, fun molding that could, you know, add a lot of variety, and I see interior designers using something like that to really give punch to a space. So that's what's available to you here. Understanding the past, how to use this thing, that's a good way to go. A resource that you guys can do, you can get my molding catalog. This is something, gosh, it dates back to the early 2000s when my first book came out. I put this molding catalog together, and it dates architectural moldings from the late Victorian into the 1930s and 40s. And so this book is a real handy way of helping you see every molding in here is dated by when it was available, dated by kind of the style and what it looks like. So not only when it was available, but the architectural style it applies to. And you can check that out. The other thing is, for earlier moldings, that Traditional American Rooms book that I wrote for Winter Tour, that too is a great book, looking at the past. A lot of those federal panel molds and the little inside panel that I was showing you, you'll see a lot of those in that book. Somerset Room and different places like that. So looking to the past, going and touring Winter Tour, going and go check that out. You guys should be traveling. You should be looking those things up because it will make you a better craftsman. I hope this helps. Let me know. I'm Brent Hull. Thanks for watching.